Hello, everyone, and welcome back to People Jew Wanna Know podcast. Today's guest kind of needs no introduction. He is very well known in the Jewish activism space, Shabbos Kestenbaum. Shabbos Kestenbaum is a PragerU political commentator and former lead plaintiff in a landmark discrimination case against Harvard. He is a regular contributor on national media, has testified multiple times in front of the United States Congress, as well as the Israeli Knesset, and lectures internationally on American politics. Shabbos did a tremendous amount for the Harvard Jewish student body when the encampments began in 2023. This was really his claim to fame, and the moral steadfastness with which he approached it, it was just amazing to watch. Many people want to frame Shabbos as some ignorant, right-wing Jewish influencer, but I hope this episode shows you that Shabbos is anything but that. While many of his stances on the war in Israel and on our U.S. politics now swing right of center, he has always considered himself a liberal, and as he says, it's not that he changed, it's that his party changed. I do think, however, that Shabbos has changed as well to some extent, because years ago he had been a Bernie Sanders supporter. So I got to pick his brain about that in the episode and how he thinks through politics and being a Jew in politics. Changing your mind is a good thing. It's important. It means you learn something new. I'm very eager to see what Shabbos learns as part of his new journey with PragerU. Shabbos is a fresh grad from college. He's crazy impressive, and this is just the very beginning for him. We are going to see so much from that guy, truly. Today, as you listen through this, you're going to learn a lot of highly useful talking points from him. How to talk about antisemitism, moral clarity, and even the Overton window. I hope you walk away from this episode feeling as empowered as I did. Please enjoy. Hello, Shabbos. Welcome to People Jew Wanna Know podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited to chat with you. Ever since I saw you on the interwebs, I have just been fascinated by your journey and how quickly you've learned and iterated on everything that you've been working on in the last 2.5 years. I have a lot of things I want to pick your brain on, so let's get right into it. Tell us about yourself. What do you do and how did you get there?
Sure. So I am a first-generation American. I'm one of 7 siblings, which is fairly typical for the Orthodox community I belong to. As my name suggests, I was born on Shabbat, the Sabbath, and so my parents wanted to honor the day by calling their son Shabbat. I have a brother whose name is Independence because he was born on Israeli Independence Day. I have a sister named India because my dad always felt spiritually attached to that country. So we come from a large family and a relatively eclectic and interesting family. I was always fascinated by religion because I don't see theology as merely the study of God or the Bible. It's sort of the study of history and culture and anthropology. And after high school, I went to an all-male, ultra-Orthodox yeshiva in the Old City of Jerusalem. But being in the Old City of Jerusalem, I was living 2 minutes away from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Dome of the Rock. And after my 2 years of yeshiva, it kind of dawned on me I wanted to study religion from a totally different background, pluralistic, academic, secular, non-denominational, which, no pun intended, is a fairly unorthodox thing for an Orthodox man to do. And I always joke that the only thing you can really do with a degree in religion is apply for unemployment benefits. It's not like when you're 30,000 feet in the air, the flight attendant said, "Quick, is there anyone with a master's in divinity?" So I sort of said, well, if I'm going to study religion, I can only do it at an institution that is really highly regarded and I can leverage it. And that's when I got the idea of Harvard. Lo and behold, I got in, which I was actually not expecting. Not to brag, but I got a full scholarship. So it was very difficult to turn that down, even though I had a lot of hesitations, particularly as an Orthodox man in a very non-Orthodox environment. It was the first time I was learning religion, really anything, with Muslims and Christians and gays and women. So it was a very new experience for me. October 7th happened. Make a long story short, I became involved in Jewish activism, and that led me to where I am now, where I'm starting my own show with PragerU in LA, focused on religion and politics, really from a Gen Z perspective. So people will try to box me or categorize me, especially as it comes to politics. But as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, said, labels are for clothing. So irrespective of people I may have endorsed or things I may have said, ultimately, I'm just very grateful to be part of the Jewish people.
It's interesting that you talk about politics and religion as kind of related. I do think they are, whether people like it or not. I do think they become especially interrelated in times of crisis when people start to gravitate towards a religion as a solution for the political developments that they see. And to me, you're an interesting character in that I view you as somebody as strong opinions loosely held. You always speak with conviction, but you're open to changing your mind. And what's most fascinating to me is that you started out as a Bernie Sanders supporter. And now you work for PragerU, which is known as a conservative, I guess, media company. Can you talk to me about what is your philosophy in associating with a political party or political ideal as an observant man? And also, I want to know, the Jew plays a very strange role when it comes to politics because we're technically alienated from any side, really. And the only way we can build coalitions, it seems to be if we start to pander to people to like us. And I don't know how we get away from that as Jews.
Well, I'll start with the PragerU point, which is when they offered me the job, I kind of whispered into the CEO's ear and said, I'm a Democrat. And they said, nobody's perfect. So that is my political philosophy where, yes, I do have strong beliefs and strong convictions, and I fight and argue for them. At the same time, as you quite rightly pointed out, and I do take it as a compliment, I'm open to change. I am not a Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. I'm someone who votes for policies, and it's policy over people and it's policy over party, which is why I'll give you an example. When we invited Donald Trump to come to the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe on the 1-year anniversary of October 7th to pray for the American hostages, Kamala Harris was invited too, because it was not meant to be a political event. And when she said no, we said, okay, well, you could come a different day when Trump isn't there. And she said no again. So my political evolution, I often think of it in a way whereby I didn't change that dramatically. I think my party, the Democratic Party, changed quite dramatically. As it pertains to the American Jewish involvement in politics, historically, the data supports this. The overwhelming majority of Jews vote for the Democratic Party. There have been splinters throughout American history, in particular the last election where President Trump got the most Jewish votes of any Republican nominee since Ronald Reagan. So we are seeing fractures. A lot of that has to do with kind of what I've been doing, which is recognizing there's a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism in the political left in a way whereby, yes, it's also in the political right, but it's not really tolerated. It's something that's cast out, even though you have bad faith actors in it. So that to me was the breaking point. As it pertains to the particularities of your question, my belief is, yes, we need strong legislation to combat climate change. And I believe in a woman's right to choose. And I believe in a $15 federal minimum wage. But I also believe we can't talk about those issues if we're dead. I don't think we can talk about those issues if Jewish Americans are being assaulted on their college campuses, if Jewish Americans are being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. And that to me became really the only issue I really cared about. And historically, the African American community has voted for their best political interests. The gay community votes for their best political interests. And I think for the first time, the American Jewish community should be voting for what is in their best political interests. And if Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or whomever it was on the left wanted to say, here's what we're going to do to safeguard American Jews, here's what we're going to do to advance our interests, I would be glad and open to hearing those talking points. The problem is the Democratic Party, at least in the last election cycle, refused to even engage in that conversation. And even though I tried in a personal capacity, which we can get into later if you want, but I tried in a very personal capacity to the chagrin of the Trump campaign to get the Democratic Party to get out of their own way, they refused. And so to me, it was a no-brainer that I would have to have supported Donald Trump, even though it was difficult and even though I lost a bunch of friends, including my old Harvard roommate who doesn't speak to me anymore.
I mean, that makes sense in theory. In practice, I'm curious how you rationalize to yourself to support someone like Bernie, because to me, Bernie has always been kind of anti-Jew, a little self-hatey.
So I think the biggest paradigm shift post October 7th was my religion influences my politics as opposed to my politics influences my religion. What I mean by that is even when I was a Bernie bro and I was at the 2016 Democratic Convention as a Bernie bro, I voted for him twice. I would do debate watch parties for him. People would ask kind of what you're asking, which is, well, hang on a second, you're also an Orthodox Jew. And I didn't really have a great way of responding. I would sort of have a cop out by saying, well, religion and politics are sort of separate. And I say it's a cop out because it didn't really make a whole lot of sense because my Jewish identity is not a part of who I am. It's an integral part of who I am. In fact, it's the culmination of everything that I am. I'm first a Jew and everything else is secondary. And after October 7th, I realized I had to be intellectually honest with myself. And I couldn't keep escaping from a very contentious issue whereby my religion and my politics were not aligning at all. And that's when I said, okay, I have to be honest. And that's when I endorsed Trump. And yeah, when I look back, I didn't just support Bernie Sanders. I marched for Black Lives Matter. I marched at the Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade was overturned. I was 9 years old when I was knocking on doors for Barack Obama when he was running for president the first time. I mean, I always say I can compare my progressive credentials to anyone any day of the week, which is why I think I was granted a degree of legitimacy when I would say during the election cycle, look, I'm as progressive as they come, but you, the American Jewish community, have to appreciate how uniquely precarious and existential this moment in time is for our people. And as I said, I think to a large degree it worked. Obviously, Trump was elected, but also we saw fissures in the American Jewish community where our historic allegiances to the Democratic Party and liberal ideologies kind of broke. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I'll make one last point, which is to say this. It is a really good thing, that even if you hate Donald Trump, that 45% of New York Jewry voted for Donald Trump, 41% of Pennsylvania Jewry, 40% of Ohio Jewry. Why? Because what that proves is the American Jewish community is a constituency that you have to fight for, that you have to make political concessions to in the same way you make political concessions to any constituency in the United States. You know, if you're running in the Democratic primaries, you know that you have to kiss Al Sharpton's ring and speak at the NAACP, and that's good. It means that the African American community is having their voices heard. And now, for the first time, there's a recognition in American political discourse that Jewish Americans are not a monolith, and if you want their votes, you have to prove yourself. You have to talk about policies that you are going to advance to help them. And if you won't talk about policies that will help them, well, guess what? They're not going to support you. And that has been one of the most profound consequences of October 7th. The American Jewish community is up for grabs. Our allegiances are being tested. And I think that's a really good thing. It means that in 2028, policymakers, candidates for president of the United States are going to have to start treating us seriously and not assuming that if you're a Democrat, well, they're just going to vote for us. And if you're a Republican thinking, well, they're just not going to vote for us. No, our votes are up for grabs. That's a really good thing. It empowers the Jewish community.
I have a clarifying question, and forgive me if this is something that I'm mistaken on. I was under the impression that most of American Jewry voted for Kamala and that Kamala lost to other contingencies, like she lost the Hispanic vote, she lost the lower class and middle class vote, and that's why she hadn't won. From my knowledge, like a bunch of American Jews did vote for her.
You are right. The majority of American Jews voted for Kamala Harris. However, if you look at the exit polls, for example, the National Election Polling Institute, it found that there was a record share of American Jews who switched to the Republican Party. And if that trend continues, the Democratic Party will be in for a rude awakening. And it is also true that, yes, the Democratic Party not only lost Jewish support, they lost support from their core constituencies, like Hispanics, like African Americans, like the working class, people who just 4 years ago were considered a blue firewall. States like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. I mean, Ohio is not even a purple state anymore. Ohio is staunchly conservative. And that is a result of plummeting support for the Democratic Party. So, yes, it's not just Jews. I think what's happening to Jews is a manifestation of a much greater problem that the Democratic Party is undergoing. And the Republican Jewish coalition, led by Matt Brooks, is doing a fantastic job at making a case to American Jews that, hey, if you want to be taken seriously, switch your voter registration to a Republican, because that will force the party to contend that they need to win you back.
You've dissected this issue of like how the modern Jew and anti-Semitism from different angles, because you've looked at it from the political lens, you've also looked at it from the college campus lens and how young people are affected by anti-Semitism. Talk to me about what you think we ought to do with where we're at today.
So I'll say something that sounds somewhat counterintuitive, so bear with me. If you truly want to combat anti-Semitism, take it from someone who went to Harvard not to sue them, but to actually study the Holocaust. That is my academic specialty. That is my academic field. I have been to many, in fact, most American Holocaust museums. I am telling you as fact, we do not need more Holocaust museums. We should go to the ones that are there, and they're great. We should support them. but we don't need to build more. We don't need to be building more plaques to Anne Frank. And I can tell you, if Anne Frank was a 90-year-old bubby living in Williamsburg, had she survived, she would have told you that there's nothing we can do to bring back the 6 million. We can honor them, we can remember them, and we should. In fact, we have to, it's command. But at the same time, we can't bring them back. What we can do is we can look at the 6 million Jews alive today who have zero connection to their Jewish identity, who've not experienced a Shabbat Friday night meal, who have no affiliation with their Chabad or local synagogue, who've never been to a Jewish summer camp. So if you really want to meet this moment, this precarious, existential, historic moment that American Jewry is facing, then we as a community, especially our leadership, they would ensure that there's not a single American Jew today who's going to public school because their parents can't afford Jewish day school. You would make sure there's not a single American Jew today who has not been to Israel at least once on a fully sponsored, subsidized trip. You would make sure that Jewish summer camps are packed. They pass the point of enrollment. They can't fit anyone anymore. Those are things that we need to be reinvesting and refocusing on. It's not constant Holocaust museums and pity us and woe unto us. Because number one, it doesn't work. There is zero data that supports the idea that increased Holocaust education decreases anti-Semitism. In fact, the opposite is actually true. New York State was one of the first states in the country to implement mandatory Holocaust education, yet it is one of the worst states for anti-Semitism. Now, part of that has to do with most Jews in America live in New York, but there is no direct correlation or positive association between increased Holocaust education and an increased love or respect or affiliation with the Jewish people. Because you can go to every single Holocaust museum in the world, and as I said, I've been to most of them, and you will not walk away with any understanding of Judaism, of the Jewish people, of our practices, of our culture. You will walk away with an understanding of those Jews in those grainy black and white photos were so weak and so pathetic and were led like lambs to the slaughterhouse, which A, isn't true. There was significant acts of resistance. But B, that does nothing to say the Jewish story. We should not be defined by 6 years of our history. It's a horrific 6 years that we must remember. But again, if we want to meet this moment, if we want to learn lessons from October 7th, it's radically reinvest in Jewish education, Jewish identity, Jewish experiences. It's the only way. And I'll make one last point. I have met with almost the entirety of the alphabet soup of the Jewish nonprofits. The head, Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, Ted Deutsch, head of the AJC, head of the World Zionist Congress. I mean, you name it, I've probably met with them. And they're good people. All of them, without exception, are all very good people. But it bothers me to no end that I and other young people have to make this argument. That no, stop making more fellowships to combat anti-Semitism. No, stop holding multi-million-dollar gala dinners. No, stop with another plaque and another Holocaust museum. There are young Jews who want to engage in their faith, who want to engage in their history and culture, and they need help to do it. They need the resources, they need the financial means. And we, thank God, are in a position in the American Jewish community to give them those resources and those financial means. But it's a choice we have to make, and I believe, unfortunately, we're not making the right choice.
I can get behind some of what you're saying, certainly. Do you think there are organizations that get it right?
Yes, I think there are some organizations that get them right. I'm just debating whether I should say them out loud at the risk of accidentally not saying another good organization. So if I'm not mentioning your organization, I apologize in advance. But I think the Zionist Organization of America, the ZOA, I think Stand With Us. I think the Israel on Campus Coalition. I actually think the IAC, the Israel American Council, Chabad on Campus. I think there really are a tremendous amount of groups that are doing a really good job. However, that is sort of the exception to the rule, number one. Number two, if they don't have the same level of funding that the major Jewish establishment has, we're really comparing apples to oranges. And number three, they're not as impactful, probably because they don't have that big budget, but also because people may not be aware of all the great things they do. Because, I mean, I speak to a lot of donors, legacy donors who are quite elderly, and I don't think they understand how radically the climate has shifted for American Jewry. So whereas for the last 10, 20, 30, even 40 years plus, they've been writing their annual check to the same 3 or 4 legacy organizations, they may not even be aware that there are these newer, younger, and smaller organizations that are just as impactful, if not of a heck of a lot more. So I think we as young people, as Gen Z, need to be doing a better job of marketing those organizations that are there for students on campus and elsewhere, because in many cases, they actually are students. They're young people who are running the organizations themselves. I'll say one last quick anecdote. After October 7th, I'm sure your listeners remember how we were all added to dozens of different WhatsApp groups of raising money for this lone soldier, for baking cakes for this army base. Any WhatsApp group conceivable, we were added to them. And what was really remarkable is for the very first time, American Jews were not saying, here's an emergency campaign for the AJC. They were saying, here's an emergency campaign for my neighbor who's about to go into Gaza. And on an anecdotal level, I remember after October 7th, I went to an armory outside of Boston, like in Redneck, Massachusetts, which I did not know existed. And on the drive to the armory, me and my friend Sroli, we texted in the Harvard Jewish student WhatsApp group. We're going to this armory to buy out as much equipment as we can, and we'll bring it to Israel. Whoever can send some money, just do it. And in that hour and a half drive, we raised $10,000. And every penny of that $10,000 went straight and directly to soldiers, to equipment. There were no overhead costs. There was no CEO. There was no gala dinner. It was entirely grassroots. It was entirely organic. And I think that will probably be more prevalent in the American Jewish community, that you don't really have to go through a middleman. I'm not against federations at all. I think they do really good work. But I think there's a pretty relevant question whereby if a federation is simply a body that hands out money to other organizations, then why not just give the money directly to those other organizations? Why go through the middleman? So again, that's one of the consequences we've seen of October 7th.
I need to reflect on what you're saying here, because you're right. And I just think there are so many hurdles that prevent us from getting there. Like, over the course of this podcast, time and time again, I've confirmed for myself that grassroots is the way to go. And I too, for example, love Stand With Us and see the important work they do on campus and how they mobilize students to be proud and Jewish and feel prepared to have difficult conversations on campus. I see the effect. These two are the organizations that I would recommend. I just feel so disillusioned because it seems as if we have absolutely no consensus across leadership of these organizations. And there's so much hubris and greed that nobody's taking a step back to be like, okay, well, whatever we're doing here, it's not working. How can we help? How can we help? Instead, they're getting in the way. And it's also related to the war in Israel, because when you see organizations like UJA out of a PR move give $1 million to Gaza, you're like, what the hell is going on? What is going on? And that's why I feel so disillusioned by it. I'm curious to know if there's anything that you've changed your mind on recently.
That's a great question. First, let me validate and complement that question, which is to say this. I'm debating again whether I should say the person's name. I probably shouldn't, but I did a panel about a year ago, and the panel was myself and the CEO of a major Jewish legacy organization. I won't say which one. And I'm telling the panel of high-end donors about the problems that many young Jews are experiencing on their campuses, particularly raising funds, because Chabads typically have a more limited budget, and often Hillels don't want to sponsor the things that these students are doing. And I said it's a real struggle. And after I say that, this head of this major Jewish establishment, he says, yes, October 7th was obviously horrific and terrible, but the way it's brought our community together has been nothing short of miraculous. We have raised, I won't say the amount because it'll probably give away the organization, but we have raised a bleep load of money. And I was sort of thinking, did you not listen to a single thing I just said? I mean, the hubris to brag about the amount of money that you have raised, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. It is a bad thing when you have students who are saying, well, we're not getting a dime. And we are not. Jewish students are not tomorrow's leaders. They are today's leaders. They are the ones who are testifying in front of Capitol Hill. They're the ones going on the national media to talk about their experiences. They're the ones suing their universities. So they're not going to do great things in a couple of years. They're doing really great things now, and they need help and support and training. And there are organizations that have the funds to do all of those things, but it seems like they're not. I will say one other example, and this actually will use the organization's name because it's public knowledge now. It was an open secret for Gen Z Jews who were involved, even minimally, in the pro-Israel space after October 7th, that FIDF was operating one of the largest scams, that so many of our friends and family members who were actually serving in the IDF either never heard of them or they're the ones who gave us a toothbrush and toothpaste. But with the hundreds, not tens, with the hundreds of millions of dollars that they were raising, Everyone was asking, where's the money going to? And the reason I can now say this is because now it's been public knowledge that there was so much fraud and waste and abuse and first class tickets and favoritism. I mean, it's actually appalling when you think about it. And this was an open secret. Every young person who was involved in the pro Israel space knew about this. But we didn't really want to say anything because it's the FIDF and you want to go to the gala and you don't want to piss off the leadership. But what a damning indictment. And by the way, what's happening at the FIDF, we know for a fact is happening at a lot of other organizations. And in the same way that there's DOGE for the federal government, the Department of Government Efficiency, I believe, and actually I was speaking to Malcolm Hoenlein, who was the former president of the Conference of Major Presidents of Jewish Organizations, and he said the same thing. There should be a DOGE for the Jewish establishment. With the hundreds of millions of dollars that they raise annually, often on the backs of young people saying, we're combating anti-Semitism, we're helping young professionals, we're helping the students. Okay, show us the records, show us what you're doing. Not in a nefarious way, but in a constructive way. If you want to raise money, we're not opposed to it. We actually want you to be successful, but you have to prove to us, you have to show us what you're doing. Because right now, a lot of young people aren't seeing that. And I'm actually trying to be helpful to many of these major legacy organizations because young people are not necessarily going to help you when they do well financially and they're at the pinnacle of their career because they're not really impressed right now. So if you want future donors, if you want Gen Z when they become 30 and 40 and 50 to help you out, you're going to have to show them right now what it is you're doing.
Super fair. We're going to doge the Jewish establishment. I like that. I do think that's where the consensus needs to be, right? When I talk about there's no consensus in leadership, there's not like a one look at everything that's going on and a consolidation or like a smart strategic decisioning around what to do. So I like that idea, although I'm sure it will be perceived as controversial. And speaking of suing and legal action, I have to ask if there's anything you can share on what the latest is with the lawsuit around Harvard and how that netted out.
Sure. So we held out for a while. Harvard tried settling shortly after President Trump was reelected, and the other plaintiffs agreed to it. I did not think the settlement went far enough and met the structural reforms we were looking for. And without getting into the details of the settlement we reached in June, suffice to say, we reached a settlement in June. And not only did we reach a settlement with Harvard, but again, love Donald Trump, hate Donald Trump, I'll just be objective. The federal government withholding billions of dollars in federal funds, not just from Harvard, but from so many of these campuses, has simply been incredible. We have seen campuses change, and it's not some great mystery as to how and why. It's because we now have a Department of Education, we have a Department of Justice, we have a hate crimes task force, and we have a White House who are squarely on the side of American Jewish students, and really American students broadly speaking. It's not just Jews. It's women who've been discriminated against in Title IX cases. It's Christian students who've been discriminated against in Title VI cases. So I speak very proudly and very confidently that the Trump administration has done more than we could possibly have imagined. And I'll give one quick example because it just happened yesterday. Northwestern, in response to strong federal intervention, established a number of structural reforms, one of them being there would be mandatory Title VI anti-discrimination, anti-Semitism training. And there were a couple of Northwestern students who said, this is Zionist propaganda, this is stifling our free speech, we're not taking this training. And Northwestern said, fine, that's your prerogative, you don't have to take the training, we're expelling you. That is what leadership means. That's what taking bold action means. Because when you have policies, when you have laws and rules on the books and they're not followed, then consequences must follow. And we saw under the previous administration, there were no consequences to anyone's actions or inactions. We're now seeing that, no. If you violate federal law, if you violate the Civil Rights Act, do not expect a penny of American taxpayer funding. Do not expect the DOJ to go even-handed. We are coming at you and we're coming at you hard. So what happened at Northwestern, what happened at Harvard is happening to so many college campuses across this country, and I think it's a great thing.
So my brother is an incoming senior at the University of Minnesota being one of the 5 campuses investigated for anti-Semitism by the Trump administration. I do believe that campus has had problems for years. And I say that because I was a student there myself 8 years before my brother. And what's interesting is I believe that when I was there was Stand With Us representation, but the support for Jewish students really came from Chabad and Hillel. And I hate Hillel. I'm going to be honest. Everybody knows this about me. And the reason I hate Hillel, especially on the University of Minnesota campus, is because the best they've got is to offer a safe space to students. they are actually quite spineless when it comes to taking a stand on any issues on campus. And to me, I'm not sure of everything that went on that campus, but I do blame Hillel for the degradation of Jewish life at the University of Minnesota because nobody led by example. They've effectively normalized that being a Jew in name only is like the way you should be Jewish on campus. And at some point, I realized what it was that bothered me so much about the University of Minnesota is it's that if you are a Jew at the University of Minnesota and you're willing to put that aside for 4 years to go there, you can pretty much get by and you'll have a wonderful college experience if and only if you're not too forward of a Jew. You're not too much of a Jew. You don't expect too much. You don't demand kosher dining halls or anything like that. But if you are a Jew first on that campus, be prepared to be met with relentless hurdles after hurdles in every way, in academics, in the dining hall, in the animosity that you feel, the apartheid wall that you're greeted with in the center of campus. And I just wonder if you think across the board, the Jewish organizations on campus are even well positioned to like deal with that, because the call is coming from inside the house is my take. Like we're rotting from within.
I'll start with Hillel first because I think all the points you just raised are entirely fair and entirely accurate. I've spoken with Adam Lehman a couple of times, and again, he's a good guy. I have nothing against him personally, but it's easy to contrast Hillel and Chabad, not necessarily because they're in competition, but simply because they're the two largest Jewish organizations on any college campus, which is to say this. If you go to any American university, you know that even though the Chabad rabbi and rebbitzin will be different people, it will be more or less the same experience, certainly the same values, certainly the same principles, certainly the same underlying goals of what they want for you and from you, which is to be the best version of you that you can be in a totally non-judgmental, Torah observant environment. Whereas if you go to a Hill on campus, they vary campus to campus, as someone who's spoken on many Hills across campuses. And not only that, but it sort of seems like their central pillar is pluralism, which pluralism can be a great political value, but it really is not a central Jewish value. You can even make a good argument that it's not a Jewish value at all. I mean, I think it is, but not nearly to the extent that Hill makes it out. A Jewish value would be like keeping kosher. A Jewish value would be like keeping Shabbat. You'll open the Hebrew Bible, and basically any page you go to, it will give you like specific commandments and values. It will never talk about pluralism. And pluralism, to the fault of surrendering what makes us a unique people, I think is a tremendous danger. And it sort of, to me, makes sense why so many young people are just naturally gravitating towards Chabad, because Chabad is very unapologetic about their stances. And if you don't like it, okay. Whereas Hillel, if you don't like it, okay, let's try to accommodate you. Let's try to work this out, which is why I'll mention his name just because he wrote an article about this, so it's public information. But Isaac Ornstein, who I believe has since graduated from Harvard, but he was a Harvard undergrad about 3-4 years ago. And for the end of the year barbecue on Harvard Hillel's campus, he and some friends are putting up Israeli flags. And a staff member from the Hillel tells them to take them down because this is not a political event. And that is an experience and a story that I've actually heard repeatedly from other Hillel campuses. And when I kind of asked Adam Lehman, the CEO of Hillel International, about this, or when I presented him different problems that different students were coming to me with, he kind of took the approach of, well, each Hillels operate independently, which I don't actually think makes a whole lot of sense because, I mean, Adam Lehman's title is the CEO of Hillel International. Hillel International is like an actual thing. So it sort of seems like a bit of a cop-out where anytime there's a problem, well, they all operate independently. And if that's true, they all operate independently, then why do we need a CEO for Hillel International? What's the point of their having universal standards? So I think, for example, if you're a Jewish space, you're a pro-Israel space, we welcome all people, but we don't welcome all ideas. And Chabad stands for that. We do not welcome all ideas. Come as you are, please, with your tattoos, with your phone, with your whatever. But we have certain standards and we're not going to change. And Hillel doesn't take that approach. And I think that's a tremendous mistake. The undergraduate president of Harvard Hillel, I'm actually forgetting his name, but he was the president of the Hillel during the encampments. And he puts out this open statement on the Hillel letterhead saying that we must welcome all of the encampment leaders who are Jewish and they're invited to a Shabbat meal. And that's the wrong approach. No, they're not. We don't accept people who call for an intifada. We don't accept people who believe in following other Jews on their way to class. We don't invite people who tear down the posters of hostages. There are certain values and opinions and beliefs that we do not accept. And we should stand up for that as opposed to trying to acquiesce and placate and in many cases just surrender to the most radical elements within our community. Like stand up for something. And if you don't stand for something, then you'll fall for everything, or you'll stand for nothing, I should say. And again, that's what I've been really disappointed with it by Hillel. And I'll say one last thing. I won't mention the campus because I don't want to get her in trouble. But I spoke on a Hillel campus a few weeks ago, and the director of the Hillel was essentially saying what I just said. And she has a lot of problems with the way Hillel is being run. And she doesn't feel that she can say this openly because she'll lose her job. And I think that's a damning indictment on not just Hillel, but on all too many Jewish organizations. And as I said, we want all organizations to succeed because when those organizations succeed, the American Jewish people succeed. But a lot of them are not succeeding.
You took the words out of my mouth. So thank you. Every year when they raise money at the University of Minnesota, I'm in their list to give donations. And at some point I just texted back the girl and I was like, take my name off your list until the word Zionism is back on the website. If you don't have the word Zionism anywhere on your websites and your whatever, I want nothing to do with you.
100%. And by the way, let me just add to that. How do I phrase this? When I met with Adam Lehman, he mentions, I think it's called the universal principles or whatever. All Hillels operate under certain principles. It's called something. It's like some declaration that they all have to abide by. And one of those principles is we're a pro-Israel organization, which is great. The problem is it's never enforced. And I actually went to Adam with a particular problem. And I said, if this is a pro-Israel organization and you're proud to be pro-Israel, then why, for example, and I mentioned specific campuses, why, for example, do you have directors of those Hillels who are openly bringing people who are against the state of Israel as a Jewish state? And that does not mean we should not have those conversations. We should have those conversations. That's what a college campus is all about. But there should be at least one space where Jews can feel that they can be safe, that they can live their values, they can be intellectually and spiritually honest with themselves. And if that's not a Hillel, then what is it? People who call for an intifada, people who believe in the eradication of Israel as a Jewish state, should not be invited on a Hillel campus. They just shouldn't. Again, invite them to campus and have discussions and collaborate and ask and dialogue, but not on a Hillel space. Because Hillel, if you say, which Hillel does, that it's a pro-Israel organization, then you can't actively do things that are not in line with that principle. So I really like how you said, take me off your list until you live by the things you preach.
Well, I think the problem is they don't preach, which is also what it is. They don't preach Zionism because they don't even have it on their website. And they claim they are pro-Israel, but I guess they're pro-Israel in theory, not in practice, because they're against Zionism, but not Israel. It makes no sense. So what I've heard from you today is that we've got the importance of grassroots work, and we've got the importance of having clear value sets. This is what we stand for and this is what we don't stand for. So I can bucket that as moral clarity, I guess. Is there anything else that you recommend?
I would sort of first underscore what you just said, which is the reason that the Jewish people, I believe, have sustained themselves and have done actually pretty well the last 3,000 years is recognizing that unity does not mean uniformity. Unity does not mean we cannot have differences of opinions. On the contrary, the Jewish texts are all about disagreements and arguing. It's what's called lishma. It's for the sake of heaven. It's because we all recognize we're all part of the same team. But it doesn't mean we can't have differences of opinion. And I get death threats quite often, actually. I get attacked a lot on social media. And I got to tell you, it really doesn't faze me. I mean, maybe it should, but it kind of doesn't. I think what is way more dangerous is not an anonymous troll on Twitter. It's when a synagogue or a federation or a Hillel or a JCC says, we don't like your politics, and therefore we have to disinvite you from coming on this campus or speaking to our community. I think that's way more dangerous because I'll use the election as a good example. I was very open that I was supporting Trump, and I was open as to the reasons why. And if people disagree with me, good. That's healthy. In fact, that's vital for a democracy. And not only should you disagree with me, you should tell me why you disagree with me. And that's why I was sort of flattered by your introduction. And if you can make a good argument, I'll probably be convinced. Tell me why I'm wrong. Do it in a respectful way, a way that's becoming of an adult participating in a civil society. But to pretend that we don't have differences and to pretend that we have to cancel people for their differences, that's incredibly dangerous. So I would encourage people, especially young people, recognize that differences make us stronger, they make us better, and we have to recognize and appreciate that we're all on the same team. We all want what's best for our people, for our country.
Okay, so I want to challenge you on that. We just talked about the fact that if you're calling for the Intifada, you should not be welcome to Hillel. And one might argue that by the same logic, if you're voting for Trump, who, wants to take away the rights from women and deport every person who is bad or whatever, any of the radical policy that the right supports, that by the same logic, they should also not be welcome. So what's the difference between what you're saying and this?
There are two major differences. One is there's a difference between the public marketplace of ideas, where you have debates in a civil society, and institutions that are set up for a specific purpose. So if Hillel wants to say we are a totally pluralistic and we actually don't have any standards and we want all ideas and all peoples and all opinions, and if you call for an intifada or if you believe in Hamas's right to resistance, we want you, then actually I wouldn't be opposed to Hillel, because then at least they're intellectually honest with their goals. The problem I have with Hillel is the blatant hypocrisy of saying we believe in key things, and then when people go against those key things, never mind, it doesn't matter anyway. That's the biggest difference, as opposed to just a general marketplace of, yes, any and all ideas should be shared, and I will make up my own mind as to whether they're good ideas or bad ideas. But there's a key difference between those two things, I would say. And then the second thing is, in a democracy, you have the Overton window. You have what is considered legitimate, acceptable discourse. Let's use immigration because you mentioned it. Should there be deportation? Should there be amnesty and a pathway for citizenship? There's sort of a general consensus as to what's considered within the Overton window of acceptable discourse. That is not to say that we should kill people whose opinions we don't like is accepted discourse. That is where I would sort of draw the line. It's actually what's called the paradox of intolerance, whereby in order to be a tolerant society, we actually have to be intolerant for certain opinions in order to preserve tolerance. So when 40%, this is a true statistic. This was published by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions 2 days before Charlie Kirk was killed. When the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression says that 40% of college students believe it is acceptable to use physical violence to shut down a speaker you don't like, that's not an opinion we will ever accept, because that's not within the Overton window of general civil discourse and debate. That's violence. That's an idea that we must condemn. We cannot entertain. We cannot invite people to share those sentiments. That's where I draw the line. And I think any healthy democracy, traditionally and historically, has drawn that line as well. Free speech does not mean that we must invite you to our panels and our conferences so you can tell us why it's okay to kill Charlie Kirk in the throat. Those are two very different mindsets.
I think it's really important that you make that distinction, and I understand what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give an extreme example, but the Jewish Community Center of, I don't know, Pittsburgh, they should not invite a neo-Nazi to speak. It's not because the Jewish Community Center of Pittsburgh doesn't believe in free speech. It's because the Jewish Community Center of Pittsburgh believes in the Jewish people and the state of Israel and a love of Torah and mitzvos, and a neo-Nazi is someone who abhors all of those things and advocates against them. That doesn't mean we're shutting down his free speech. We're saying this institution, which is catered for certain ideals that we want our practitioners or congregants to believe and say and do certain things, then we're not going to entertain people who think differently. Where I talk about being disinvited from my politics, well, if the whole point is I actually do want what's best for the Jewish people, and I do believe in Jewish values in the state of Israel, I just disagree on how best to get there, and then you cancel me, that is a problem. So I think there are two distinctions here.
Yeah, makes sense. And I want to pivot to learn a little bit more about your time in Poland and supporting Ukraine. So I am Ukrainian. I came to America from Ukraine in 2006, Donetsk.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
That's hardcore.
Very controversial place. I have relatives that serve in the Ukrainian army and they are stationed in Donetsk. Like I have an uncle who has won medals and awards and has been wounded multiple times. Like my family is very tied to the war. I'm curious to know what you learned from being there. And I also have a hot take to share with you. Okay. So my philosophy about Jewish life in Eastern Europe, especially in places like Poland, is that they're still all low-key anti-Semitic, but they want to deflect your attention from revealing that about themselves. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. You know what I mean? And so when you come to Poland on an organized trip, they're like, don't look at the disaster behind us. Look over here. Look at this amazing memorial. And you're like, but I'm talking to people and they're asking me if I have horns. And they're like, oh, no, don't worry about that. Look at this memorial that we've built. Is that what you picked up on as well? Or what has been your experience?
Well, first of all, I don't go on organized trips. I go myself. I've lived in Krakow for about half a year. I have very good friends who are Christian Poles. Granted, they're affiliated with the Jewish Community Center of Krakow, so they're probably a little biased. I would agree with you when you go on those organized trips, it's quite selective. So you're meeting specific people and you're going to specific places where, yes, obviously they're only going to talk about the positives. Having said that, as someone who, again, goes to Poland quite often by myself, not through an organization, and actually trying to understand what is modern day Poland. In fact, before October 7th, my master's thesis, which I did not end up writing, was called The Gas Chambers Down the Road, Oświęcim's Contemporary Attitudes Towards its Jewish Past. Oświęcim is the Polish name of the city that we call Auschwitz. People are often surprised to learn that Auschwitz is not merely a death camp, it's also an actual city. The death camp was called Auschwitz because that's where it was. And Auschwitz today is actually a relatively, I wouldn't say progressive, but somewhat liberal city. They have a really well-ranked hockey team, including an Israeli who plays for that hockey team. I actually stayed in Oświęcim for a couple of weeks to sort of try to understand. So I go out of my way to understand the Poles' true feelings. I've never really, I've experienced anti-Semitism in Poland once, but it was actually not by a Pole. It was by a tourist, so it doesn't really count. I've never experienced anti-Semitism in Poland by a Pole. I haven't. I genuinely haven't. And again, I have experienced anti-Semitism at Harvard, so it's not like I'm keeping a secret from you. I genuinely haven't. And when people say, are you afraid to go? On the contrary, people have actually stopped me to take pictures with me because they see the yarmulke. I remember I was in Łódź and someone rolls down his car window to shout Shalom Aleichem. It's actually quite sad, but the first time I ever experienced anti-Semitism was not in Poland. It was on Harvard University's campus. In fact, I went to Poland for the Jewish Cultural Festival, which is the largest Jewish cultural festival anywhere in the world outside of Israel. 40,000 non-Jewish Poles who, in some ways, mourning a loss because Poland was 10% Jewish before the Holocaust, but in other ways celebrating 1,000 years of Polish Jewish history. They're spitting dreidel and eating gefilte fish. And yes, it's a little odd as an observant Jew to see it, but they want to tap into a culture that they don't have anymore. And as I said, I really have not experienced animosity. I've really only experienced the contrary. I will say, though, and I don't mean to insult you, but the data supports the idea that Ukrainians are far more anti-Semitic than the Poles. As an amateur pseudo-intellectual and Holocaust historian, Babin Yar, when 36,000 Jews were killed in less than a week, could not have happened without the voluntary and willing participation of Ukrainians. This does not mean all Ukrainians are terrible, obviously, but it does mean Ukraine must grapple with its past in a way that it just doesn't. It must grapple with the fact that the Azov battalion in the Ukrainian army is an actual Nazi battalion. They must acknowledge that the statues they have to Stepan Bandera are bad. He was an actual Nazi who killed tens of thousands of Poles and Jews. So there's an aspect of the past that they're not grappling with. So I would agree with you on that front. But again, I have yet to experience that directly. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, I went to Ukraine and I worked with Ukrainian refugees. I brought them over the border in Kharkova and then eventually to Krakow in Poland. And I continue to work with Ukrainian refugees through the Jewish Community Center of Krakow. And I think the rebirth of Jewish life in Poland, certainly in less than an hour drive from Auschwitz, is a remarkable testament to who we are as a people. Now, am I encouraging Jews to move to Poland? Not necessarily. What I am encouraging is Poles who people often forget after World War II, you then have 40, 50 years of communism where you were not able to talk about your Jewish identity or your experiences during the war. And now you have young Poles who are discovering for the first time, actually, my grandmother's name was not Christina, it was Sarah. And actually, I'm Jewish. And what does that mean? So I encourage those young Poles to invest in their Jewish identity. Find out what it means to be Jewish. Come to a Shabbat dinner at the Jewish Community Center of Krakow or Warsaw. Meet with the Chabad rabbi and Rebbitzin. And the last point, because you were touching upon this, I'll say his name because I think he says this openly, but Rabbi Gorarie, who's the Chabad rabbi in Krakow, he told me that one of the reasons he thinks there is not a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland, which again, the data supports the idea that there is not a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland, is because there aren't enough Jews to really hate. I mean, even if we want to go with the most liberal estimates, there are no more than 10,000 openly practicing Jews in all of Poland. Whereas if Jews were to start going back en masse and demanding their property back and demanding their houses back, I would imagine, yeah, there would probably be more anti Semitic sentiments coming to the surface. But I don't think that's a reality we're ever going to have to contend with. So maybe I'm living blissfully in ignorance, but I'm okay with that.
That last point there is, I think, really important. The Jew is convenient.
On the flip side, I'm thinking out loud. No, it's not Donetsk. You'll tell me the city, but one of the largest synagogues in the entire world is in Ukraine. That menorah synagogue, there's very open and public Jewish life, and that perhaps can explain the anti-Semitism because visibly Jews are visible targets, whereas in Poland they're just quantitatively not a lot of visible Jews. So it's like, who exactly are you directing your hate against?
You're also spot on about the fact that Ukraine has a really profound, deep history of anti-Semitism. And being a Ukrainian Jew, like having one grandparent who is not ethnically Jewish and ethnically Ukrainian and Russian, is so weird to me. And I'm so proudly Ukrainian, knowing very well that like my Jewish great grandparents fought in the Soviet army. Meanwhile, their peers were getting shot at into a mass grave. And then if you go to Babi Yar, this is so Ukrainian, they make a memorial for the mass shooting of many Jews. But the memorial doubles as a park and a play area for children because God forbid we don't optimize maximally the space that we have and make it super efficient.
Yeah. I've seen that at Babin Yar, of course. I've also seen that at death sites in Poland. The first one was actually Chelmno, which most people don't really know. In fact, the reason that Chelmno stopped operating as a death camp was not because the Soviets or the Americans, it's because they successfully killed all the Jews in the region. There were no more Jews left to kill. Of the roughly 300,000 people who were killed, there are only two known survivors, Shimon Trebnik and Mordechai Podtremnik, who were both interviewed in Cloud Lanzmann's film Shoah. But anyway, when I was there for the first time and you could still see the bones, literally, you can see bones on the ground and you could pick it up and bury them, which is what we did. We also saw a family with a young kid and a dog, and she was biking on the trail. So I think, not to justify it, because I agree with you, it's bad and does a tremendous disservice to the historical memory. I can understand, while still disagreeing, the other approach of, well, so much of Poland and Ukraine are sites of horrific killings. What exactly do you want us to do? Not use half of all public land in the country? So again, I don't agree with that approach, but I can understand, and Oshvenchim happens to be a really good example of this, where, yes, I see the gas chambers from my kitchen window, but I had nothing to do with it. My grandparents who lived in Oshvenchim were kicked out. There was an exclusion zone, the zone of interest around the camp. And why should I leave my home? This was my parents' home, my grandparents' home. I was born here. I'm going to die here. What, I should not live my life because of a horrific tragedy 80 years ago? So I don't agree with that approach, but I can understand where it's coming from, especially when you're growing up and you literally don't know a single Jew. There are 0 Jews who live in Oshvenchim, whereas in 1939, 55% of the city were Jewish, including, the Bubova Rebbe. It was a major hub of Hasidic life. And so I get if you just don't grow up with other Jews and it's something that happened 80 years ago and it wasn't your fault, I can understand while still not agreeing.
We need to find a tasteful middle ground as the conclusion there. And as we wrap here, what would you say your message is to Jewish people today?
Oh, gosh. What is my message? I think in an era of conformity and in an era when it is so much easier to be complacent and to drop out, try to drop in, try to double down on not what makes us a hated people, but what makes us a unique people. When people focus exclusively on fighting anti-Semitism, they ignore the uniqueness of their faith and their people. Why is it that so much of the world is fascinated, often in a negative way, with the Jewish people? Learn the Talmud. Try to experience a Friday night meal. Go to your Jewish community center. Have a relationship with a rabbi or a rebbitzin. It's much easier to not do any of those things, especially socially. If you're on a college campus, the easiest thing to do as a Jew is to say, as a Jew, I'm calling for an intifada, or as a Jew, I denounce my Judaism. What's much harder, yet much more admirable, I would say, is to say, I am Jewish and I want to know what that means. And I want to live up to my ancestors, because young American Jews are standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, just giants. And I don't mean going back 3,000 years. I mean that too. But I mean going back 2 years ago on October 7th. I was just at one of the hostage rallies that happen every week, and we heard from the father of one of the hostages, and his message was not that of revenge or anger or pain, which certainly he's feeling all three of those things, but it was one of hope and love and optimism. I mean, that to me is miraculous. There are giants among us, as the saying goes. And I would encourage young Jews, and I know your audience primarily encapsulates young Jews, is to recognize the profound history that we are living through. This is a moment in time where we will be telling our kids and our grandkids about what were you doing when the Jewish people were facing their greatest existential crisis since the Holocaust. And I hope that your answer, that my answer, that our collective answer will be, we stood up. We did something. We were counted. We doubled down on our Jewish identity, as opposed to we conformed, we placated, and we surrendered. I think that would probably be my message. And also, not that I'm on my deathbed and not that I'm dying, God forbid, but I would want that to be my legacy. I don't want to be known as the guy who fights anti-Semitism, because yes, I obviously did that, and I'm very proud of what we accomplished at Harvard. But I don't really define myself by our ideological adversaries. I don't really define myself as fighting against. I fight for Jewish values, the Jewish state, Jewish peoplehood, and that is way more uplifting and encouraging and meaningful, rather than constantly fighting against.
Well done. What can I say? Mic drop. Tell me, how can people connect with you and learn more about your work?
Sure. So one of the few great things about being named Shabbos Kestenbaum is there are no other Shabbos Kestenbaums. So you can type in my name on Twitter and Instagram. And that's where I'm most active. I'm pretty active on social media these days. Just type in Shabbos Kestenbaum. I'm the first and only one that comes up. And feel free to DM me there, and let's keep the conversation going. I'm actually pretty responsive for my DMs, which I'm very proud of.
You know what? I need to use that marketing angle for my name, because Margarita Lyadova too does not appear anywhere.
There you go. So my email is also, it's just my name at gmail.com. No numbers or spaces, because it's not like I ever had the problem where someone else was going to take the Shabbos Kestenbaum. It's really has not happened to me yet.
I have one final question for you. It's one that I ask every single guest. Who would you like to nominate for People Do Want to Know?
Wow, that's a good question. Who would I want to nominate for People Do Want to Know? That's a tough one. This is gotcha journalism. I mean, there are two immediate people who come to mind. One, because I was just with him, Shai Davidai, who you may have already had on, but he's an excellent voice of reason. He is someone who can straddle both political spectrums between right and left. He's respected by both the right and left. When he saw that I was going too extreme in one way, he provided constructive criticism. And we often talk about the students who were fighting back against anti-Semitism. He was, I think, the leader, and unfortunately one of the only professors, faculty who also stood against anti-Semitism. So that makes him really unique, and he's just a great guy all around. So the first would be Shai Davidai. I think he's excellent. And then the second, I mean, it's a bit of a cop-out because it's kind of classic, but President Isaac Herzog, I think he's a lot more interesting than people give him credit for. He's a bit of a non-controversial, relatively boring figurehead who, cuts ribbons and meets with lots of people. But his background is fascinating. His lineage is fascinating. And I think he has a pretty good pulse of the country. And people should ask him more questions as opposed to just doing formalities and ceremonies with him.
Thank you. These are wonderful nominations. And I'm just going to brag for a moment because it's my podcast and I was, if not the first, then one of the first people to do a long form interview with Shai when his ID got taken away.
Wow.
Yeah, so I had him on the podcast years ago, but maybe it's time for a victory lap for Shai.
Yeah, do a part two. I mean, so much has changed since then, including he's no longer at Columbia. But doesn't surprise me, I already spoke to him. He's awesome, as is this podcast.
Thank you so much for doing this. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People Do Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People Do Want to Know.